is Thursday. Are you okay back there? I'm sorry. Thursday, December 22nd, 2016, meeting of the North Andover Board of Health. We are now called to order, and the first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For those watching at home, you'll see a new face at the front desk here. We do not have a new board member. We have a quorum tonight of the three of the members, but this is Suzanne Egan, who's new town council, so she'll be sitting with us up here tonight. So we're going to move out of order since we have a party here before us, so we're going to go right into the new business, two hearings that are pertinent to issues at Royal Crest. So Brian, do you want to start?
We wanted to start with Building 12, Unit 4 first.
Okay.
I gave in your package a little breakdown, a little write-up as to what has transpired with this, and I'll just go through this real quickly. The Health Department received a complaint for Building 12, Apartment 4, regarding mold issues. Michelle Grant, our inspector, did perform an inspection on October 25th, 2016, and it revealed water infiltrating through the foundation or subfloor and ponding in the master bedroom. In order to correct what was sent on October 26th, you guys have a copy of that with a violation of the housing code for chronic dampness. The Royal Crest has submitted an appeal through their attorneys on November 3rd, and a copy of that is also attached, requesting to be heard before the board to appeal the term chronic, claiming that was an erroneous statement made by the Health Department, and they're requesting to be modified or withdraw the order with respect to the alleged chronic dampness. In going through the files, I have actually determined that this is an ongoing problem. It has been documented in the past. So I think the term chronic is appropriate for this particular order letter, and I've attached 4 documents in your packet that reflect this. One of them was back in 1991. It was for mold and ice forming on the inside of the windows and excessive mold. The complainant at that time never responded to the Health Department. An inspection was never done, so the case was closed. There's another order letter, and that was for Building 12, Unit 4, so it was the exact same apartment. Also in 1991, Building 12, Unit 3, which is right next to it, there was water ponding under the carpeting, and they were cited for chronic dampness back then. The seal at the top of the foundation was replaced, the foundation was sealed, and they replaced the interior wall, and that was closed in July of 1991. I have an email from Royal Crest Construction Services Manager John Murray. There was no date on the top of the email, but it was when Gene Willis was the town engineer here, so that was fairly recent. He was discussing the installation of a forced water mitigation system to draw the water away from the buildings when the water table rises above their slab grade, keeping the hydrostatic pressure down, thus keeping the garden-style apartments from flooding. He also states that Royal Crest had purchased more than 60 dehumidifiers, which are all already spoken for. He also stated in the email that each garden-style apartment should be outfitted with a self-draining dehumidifier, and the brick exteriors of all the buildings should be sealed to keep them water and mold-proof and to cut the absorption of water down. I also have an order letter sent to Royal Crest on July 11th, 2007 from the Health Department, basically stating that there were chronic dampness issues with a multiple of buildings, and the buildings included buildings 3, 4, 11, 12, 15, 20, 25, 36, 38, 39, 45, 46, and 47. And in this letter, it states that the records show mold complaints and chronic dampness issues for the lower level apartments dating back to 1990. I believe that all the drainage work throughout the entire site and all the permanent drains they are now doing is a result of that particular order. That is what I have for you. Those are the documents that I found through our own office and through emails that have been printed out and were in the Royal Crest box that we had downstairs. So after that, And after the original order letter, I had talked to the manager at the time, Dan O'Connor, and we decided to do soil testing out there. So the engineering representative here tonight, Ken and Michelle, went out and did soil testing, and myself went out and did soil testing around Building 12 and determined that the water table was extremely high in this area and right at the slab of the actual building itself. So this actually was built on a wetland, and we actually found the old wetland soils, and they did these surveys and determined that this is definitely an issue. So in conclusion, my recommendation was obviously to keep the order as written and not modify it. Sure, please.
Thank you all for the opportunity. I'm sure everyone has more Christmas shopping to do and would rather not be here. But we do sincerely appreciate your time, and we do value our residents at the community. And
Please tell us who you are.
Oh, my name is Brian Nicholas. I'm the regional manager with AIMCO. And as a result, the reason why we're here is not to try to cancel these orders. We do want to get the work done. We're here for two things. One, as Brian said, we're actually here for two buildings as well. So it's Building 16 and Building 12. The first issue is the siting of the chronic dampness. As Brian said, the last order written at Building 12 was greater than 25 years ago in 1991, and as a result, foundational waterproofing was done. And in Building 16, from my visit to the Board of Health office, there was no other order issued until recently this last year in November. Therefore, the term chronic, we feel, should not apply in this situation. And also, the second item is that AIMCO, again, does intend to perform the work, and we have provided engineering plans for Building 16, and Building 12's engineering plans will be provided as well. What we are asking for regarding the work being done is that we are allowed to commence the work when the winter weather breaks in the springtime. This is a result of, as we all know, living in New England, the weather being quite unpredictable. The frozen ground will make our efforts much more difficult, as well as will create additional disturbances to our residents in the building, and that's our primary concern. Historically, with frozen ground, the water tables should not be an immediate concern right now in New England until the April timeframe. With the winter weather, with every 8-hour day that the contractors are working, they will be half as productive. And this project typically has taken us 4 to 6 weeks to complete in the past. Therefore, it could be extended to 10 to 12 weeks, not foreseeing any snowstorms, sub-zero temperatures that wouldn't allow crews to work outside. The foundation work in the past, it's we dig a very large trench around the building, and it can be frustrating to residents even in good weather. In this type of weather condition, the residents would have to, at times, walk around the parking lot in certain areas of these buildings. They use one main entrance. If we had to shut that entry down during the foundation work, they'd have to walk along around to the other side of the building. We would certainly clear the walkway, but this could lead to a greater chance of slips and falls with the winter conditions. With the trench being dug in temperatures that are 0 degrees, the foundation application to seal it needs to be applied in temperatures above 50 degrees. With the trench being open, if we have winter weather that it snows a foot, even more, and then switches to rain like we had this past weekend, and then we have 50-degree temperatures, because we all know New England weather just tends to throw us a bag of everything. The water will all melt and will be in the trench. We would have to re-excavate the trench to remove the snow. But if we have quick changing temperatures, the water would be stuck in a trench against the foundation, causing more potential issues and making the building more susceptible to the first floor residents for water coming in. So given the intensity of New England weather and the fact that with the with the frozen ground that the water table should not be an issue in the months of January and February, we're asking to extend the work to be allowed to be done when the weather breaks in the springtime. If the weather breaks in March, we will perform it in March. This work is being completed as a larger term project throughout the community. We've already completed 30 building foundations around the community in the past 5 years. With these two, we would have 32 of the 50 buildings completed at the property. 22 foundations have had flashing work completed in the last 5 years. 8 are planned in 2017. 14 buildings have had grinding and repointing work completed in the past 5 years, with an additional 9 buildings scheduled in 2017. We've completed 5 bioretention cells to hold stormwater drainage that comes onto the community from the surrounding neighborhoods and houses that help slow the water down that used to really overload the city's water system. So we hold it on the community until after the storm, so it slowly drains into the city's water system. And overall, AIMCO has invested $12 million in the past 5 years on these types of waterproofing refurbishments, and including window replacements and roof replacements in all the buildings. And what we're really asking for is to be able to do the waterproofing and foundation at these buildings when the weather is appropriate, so we can do it properly and apply the foundational sealing properly on the buildings. And that's our second request, which I understand is a lengthy one, but I wanted to make sure I explained it fully.
Brian, I can understand the desire to postpone the work until the weather gets better. Backtracking a little, and I recall you were here last year for the meeting on November the 19th, and I watched that audio video today, all painful 1 hour and 20 minutes of it. And a main concern at that time was you just didn't like the verbiage that we used. Chronic water problems. Today, don't like the word chronic water problems. So if it's not chronic, what is it?
Well, thank you, Mr. McCarthy. What my statement is that with no recent history of complaints at the Board of Health, at least in the last 25 years, which is a pretty lengthy period of time at Building 12. And after that order, there are notes in the Board of Health's file system that the foundation was resealed, and there are no other orders on file for Building 16, period, for water infiltration. I disagree with the word chronic regarding these items. Again, we're not debating. We want to do the foundations here. Just the word chronic, I don't feel applies when we're talking about something that happened more than 2 decades ago at one building, and after the fact, the foundation was resealed.
Well, let's talk about, just for a moment, the history of Royal Crest. You have, I believe, 50 buildings there?
50. Yes.
Each building has 12 apartments.
Correct.
So that's 600 apartments, 3 stories. So you have 200 people that live, 200 apartments on the bottom level.
Correct.
Okay? So 200 apartments, that's about 1-2% of the populace of the entire town of North Andover that live in an apartment, in a building built on a peat bog. On a peat bog. The apartment, the lower level, the bottom of it is 3 feet below grade. The water table has been up to 17 inches below grade, so arguably you have almost 2 feet at one time or another of water on the outside of the wall of 1 or 2% of the people that live in North Andover in their homes, in their apartments.
Well, we
That's
do.
chronic. And as I said at that time, I'm an engineer. I know about matters like this. And you will not admit the word chronic. And the way we ended that meeting, by the way, and this is pretty much verbatim, if you continue to have mold and it's not addressed, the board will not be sympathetic the next time you come back to us. And here you are again. And the problem that we had the last meeting is primarily semantics, verbiage. You got a problem with chronic? It is chronic. How could it not be chronic? A lady that spoke at that meeting, she had a 4-month-old baby there in that apartment. There was mold everywhere. There was mold in the back of the baby's dresser. And you and your lawyer or lawyers refused to acknowledge that there was a chronic problem. And I tell you, we said last year that we're not sympathetic. I can not speak for Tom. I cannot speak for Frank. But I am not sympathetic to you at all.
Mr. McCarthy, can I just ask a follow-up question? I was under the impression you would, and we're not obviously debating that order anymore, but that order was corrected because the discussion at this meeting was that we were going to open up sections of wall and show the Board of Health the foundation.
And I was there, excuse me, last year
Yeah.
with Michelle when that was done.
And from my understanding,
Because I wasn't comfortable, to be honest with you,
Yep.
her going there by herself, dealing with the people in management at Watercrest.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. McCarthy, I don't know you personally. I'm sorry if I've offended you, but...
No, you haven't offended me.
Okay. I'm
Personally,
management at Royal
I
Crest.
think you offended all of us. You shouldn't be here right now.
Mr. McCarthy, I'm here to talk about that we've, been completing. We've completed 30 of our buildings, which is 60%. If by next year with these next 2 buildings, we'll be over 60%. The company has spent millions of dollars, over $10 million, which is a serious commitment for a private landlord, to complete. Some of the issues, stem from water coming onto our property from neighboring houses that don't have stormwater drainage. I certainly respect, your experience as an engineer. What we're here to do is to talk about that, the winter weather that we're going to be experiencing, we feel strongly will negatively impact our residents.
That does have an impact. I'm somewhat sympathetic to you on that.
Thank you. And I know a lot of these, I lived at Royal Crest Estates myself for 3.5 years. I miss Royal Crest Estates, to be quite honest with you, as a homeowner, because of the various services that were provided to me as a resident there. And now I have a house and I got to shovel on my own and rake my own leaves. But, I care about these people. I moved my life to be up here to work at Royal Crest Estates. I could be in Rhode Island with my family and friends. I moved up here because I cared about these people. So I take offense to the fact that you feel this way about management, but, the bottom line is that I'm asking that the work be done in a time frame that would be less disruptive to residents, not have the potential to have a resident slip and fall and injure themselves, or have a project that, we want it to take 4 to 6 weeks, but not get double the time, where people have excavators and mounds of frozen ground around their windows in the wintertime when they have nowhere to go in the wintertime. You can't go outside to a park. You have to go inside your apartment home. So we're asking, as that part of the order goes, to allow us to delay. I don't want to, I understand the semantics part of your conversation. I feel that with history, that there's no history at Building 16 on file, and at Building 12, it's 25 years ago, and the foundation was resealed. And bring weather reports, but to be frank with you, the Building 12 situation, there was a massive rainstorm the night before, and I was present the day after. The resident called me as regional manager, and I went down there, and the gutters were placed improperly on this building, which caused the pooling of the water outside this resident's apartment. And the resident would tell you that himself if he was here, and me and him are on good terms, and he has a new baby, and I wanted to fix this situation for him as well. And I feel comfortably that we did prevent more water from coming in because we fixed the gutters and we fixed the way the ground was pitched. But we're not even arguing to do that building's foundation. We're not here to argue that. We're here to argue the wording of the use of the word chronic, and we're here to ask for the...
Then please argue the word chronic, because I'm very interested in what your argument
Let me ask
is.
a question here. Brian, in terms of the housing code and the way this letter is written, you've obviously spent some time and some energy and some cost
Yes.
about a word here. Do we take this word, as a hypothetical, we take this word chronic out of this, does this impact anything else as sort of a downstream from the point here, if, for instance, we took chronic out? They have to have a reason why they said they don't like chronic in this.
I believe it's, and maybe Suzanne could speak more to this about liability, legal issues, things down the road. Our code does say chronic dampness and mold. So those are things that we did find. And when you look back through the file and you read everything in the order letters from 2007 and complaints and order letters, even dating back even further, and what we see today, it is chronic, and it does meet the definition of chronic by the state code. So there's no reason to change it. And I
So
don't know
the
if you guys
phrasing
want
that's
to change it
used
for
in
some
state
reason,
code
but
is chronic dampness
Correct.
by definition. Number
Correct.
two, they're arguing 2 points. If we say we put it off for some months while the weather goes on, but there's still an apartment that's exposed as having some problems there,
and I'm sure there's more than one.
how can we say to them they can mitigate this because there are people living in there where there's mold there that, we're the Board of Health, not the Board of Construction. How do we protect people that are, now that a problem has been discovered, either we or they make an offer to protect the people that are living in that apartment?
I mean, they could move them into upper level apartments, but what they've done in the past is they've offered them other apartments at an increased rent. Some of them can't afford the increased rent, so they say no, and they stay in the apartments, and they don't complain to us. However, in this case, I think, Ken is their engineer who was out there with us on site looking at this stuff. He might be able to give you a better idea as to the construction schedule part of it and what it would take to do it and get it completed. But in essence, I think obviously we should keep the chronic in there because it is chronic. I think we do want to protect the residents. That's why I want to get this done sooner rather than later. We've been trying to get this done for over 2 months now. So by the appeals and not having a quorum last month, it's literally been pushed back over 2 months since this first started. So it could have been done by now if they had started it back when it was first noticed.
Brian, obviously, they haven't started
Correct.
that. Therefore, we've lost 2 months. Is his request reasonable or unreasonable from your perspective to wait till the weather is better?
The only problem I see with that is if you wait, then you further subject these apartments to additional flooding. And the water table isn't the highest right now, but it's high in the fall, and it's high again in the spring. So depending on when the spring thaw is, when the snow melt is, how much rain we get this coming spring, they could have issues before the actual work is completed. So I guess we could talk to their engineer, find out what he thinks in terms of a construction schedule and a timeline would be appropriate to get this done. And you can build anything in the winter. You can pour foundations, you can, cure foundations, you can build houses, you can build buildings. It's not impossible to do in the winter. I don't know what the logistics are for actually getting that done with an applied sealant to the exterior foundation, but I'm assuming there is a way to do it if needed. And maybe Ken can address that for us.
Just to clarify one comment, Mr. McCarthy, we, over the past month, we have not, sat on this. We did have engineering plans designed for these 2 projects and started the process to at least get the contracts in place. And we're happy to provide a signed contract to the board, for the work. Part of the delay was the Thanksgiving break, and part of the request was that we provide a signed contract for work within 5 days. And that, due to the scale of these two projects, we were able to get a engineering scope, but we were not able to get a signed contract in place with the projects. But we would happily, if given the opportunity to do them in the spring, if the town, wanted some reassurance and the commitment, provide a signed contract with the vendor who's going to be performing the work to give you that reassurance that the work is going to be done. If you'd like.
I disagree with that. Back then, it was 5 days for the scope of work and the signed contract. We talked, we emailed back and forth. I gave you an additional week and a half to get a signed contract. You guys have done a plethora of buildings already. It's not something outside of the realm that you already had and could get done quickly. And you asked for an extension until December 16th. I said, get it to me as soon as possible. I said, get it to me by December 2nd, I think, and that was a week and a half out at that point. It's now December 22nd, and we still haven't gotten one yet.
Yes, and we had been waiting to be here.
Okay.
And, I would hope that, with a project of this scale, if the town was going to be spending taxpayers' dollars, that they would, look at different vendors and get pricing and make sure that they have everything lined up appropriately, and that just couldn't be done in the time frame given, which is why we asked for the appeal, because we did not want to, look like we were in violation of the request we wanted to explain. So we have been working on that, and we intend to provide it. We have never argued that we want to provide the work, just the time scale has not been something that we were comfortable with, and that's why we're here. So if you,
Let me digress for just a moment, and again, looking at notes from past meetings concerning such problems at Royal Crest, building by building, and you have addressed water problems in 30 buildings so far, and that's good record, but 20 you have not. Where to from here? What is the master plan? Are you going to have French drains in all the remaining 20 buildings that you may or do have water problems in?
So
And when will that be done? What's your timetable?
the focus on the 30 buildings that were done were, as maybe you can see, there are there's a bordering area of water, and maybe Kenny, from the engineer, could speak a little bit more fluently on this. But the upper neighborhoods and cul-de-sacs of houses that were built after our property was built do not have stormwater drainage. So that water flows with gravity downhill towards 114, and our property happens to be in the way. So the focus of the 30 buildings were as a preventative measure around this flow of water and around the drainage channels. A building like 16 was not done as an immediate building because it did not have a history of that. Building 16 is over here, of where that water is coming in, and it's not in the way of a drainage channel, one of the main drainage channels, and there were no complaints on file. Therefore, it was put on as not as the highest priority as the buildings in direct proximity to this that's coming off the neighboring areas. So hopefully that makes logical sense. We thought it made the most logical sense, and Brian had made some statements before about the 2007 order, and building 12 and building 16 are not labeled in that order in 2007. So that's why these
Building 12
particular
is in the 2007 order.
Okay. Oh, maybe that's because building 12 was done in 1991, so maybe that's why it wasn't put on the immediate. So, but building 16 was not. I've heard some requests to maybe have the contractor talk about the downsides of doing this type of work in the wintertime.
And also I think that another question that came up was we wanted their overall plan. Eventually, the
You haven't
plan
spoken to that,
is,
his initial question.
right, the plan is to do all of the buildings, but it does take time to do each of
It takes
them.
time, and next year, we have flashing work, which is the copper flashing planned at 8 buildings, as well as in 2017, we have plans for 9 buildings for grinding and repointing work. And these are pretty large projects, and grinding and repointing is also not a very pleasant job to do for our residents, because you're literally grinding the mortar out of the brick and remortaring. But we do have a long-term plan, and on top of this, Kenny is currently redoing a large drainage basin that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think holds the water of 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But over here at the pond, which is scheduled to probably be completed in 30 days. So a lot of projects are taking place with these biocells. So therefore, we're prioritizing to make sure that there was a 5-year plan put in place with the Environmental Protection Agency, and part of this is making sure we're upkeeping that plan to hold certain amounts of water that are coming off of our property and slow it down as it goes on to 114 that used to, being a resident here, flood pretty severely 3 years ago, and now during large storms you don't have that large amount of pooling of water because the system is not as inundated as it was years past.
So the high water table on those remaining 20 buildings that hasn't been addressed now, what's the timeline? 5 years, 10 years? Do you have a timeline to address?
I don't have, Mr.
You don't?
McCarthy, I'd rather not, because I don't have the exact timeline.
So we could be coming back, because last year we discussed primarily building number 7.
Which,
And
after
now we're
investigation, was
discussing,
not a
2
foundational
different
issue.
buildings. And so if we don't have a timeline to address the drainage problem on those remaining 20 buildings, arguably, we could be coming back another year or two to address some of them too.
Mr. McCarthy,
I don't think it's
trust me,
unrealistic to have a
I would
timeline.
love for you guys to be out shopping or be with your families. So I want to make clear our points again that, the conversation here is about Building 12 and Building 16, the chronic dampness.
Excuse me, but I asked if there's a timeline so that we don't come back to.
This appeal,
to help you.
is not about the timeline of the completion of the entire property. There's
Okay.
there's not a history. So
There was not a history?
I'm sorry, I didn't finish my sentence. But the reason why we're here is to talk about the use of the word chronic, as well as to discuss postponing this work until better weather can be in the March timeframe, so that we can complete the project when we would not be as great of a disturbance to our residents and potentially endanger them with slips, falls, or just disturbances in general with this work taking twice as long in the wintertime.
So the 2 main concerns that you have is the word chronic, as you had last year and in the past, and also where to from here as far as the remediation of these 2 buildings this winter, possibly delaying it to late winter, early spring. So if we can break them in half, again, what is the problem that you have with the word chronic? Because you don't see it as a chronic problem. It is as clear as it can be, from my perspective, that it's a chronic problem. So persuade me otherwise.
What is your definition of chronic?
It's there. It continues to repeat itself.
Okay.
Look, this is
So my-
7:35. If you take a look at the first 35 minutes of the meeting last year, November the 19th, we're at the same point that we're at right now.
So
We're
you're-
fighting over the word chronic, and we've done that in the past.
I understand. I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but just to formally, we are going to disagree, I think, on this. But the reason why we're disputing it on these 2 orders is that Building 16 does not have an order on file from the town.
Right now, we're just discussing
Let's talk about
Building
12 right now.
And,
We're
okay,
talking
and
about
Building
you-
12 does in 1991, and there was work
In
completed.
2007,
And the 2007 is a property-wide notice.
but this was one of the buildings that they were having complaints on. Not every complaint gets
There was-
documented, not every time something happens, the resident calls us. We get calls all the time about various different things, And there are notes that are written in this order letter that state, we get numerous calls, we've done numerous inspections throughout the entire property. Building 7 you were given an order letter in 2007 regarding Building 12, as well as several other buildings. So there was an issue back then that caused that order letter. So that was just a few years ago, and it was 30 years ago, it was a complaint, there was inspection, there was water issues, it was done again, now it's been done again. I think that does indicate it is more of a chronic issue, and I think that term does need to be in that order letter. Just because it doesn't happen every year or every day.
Well, if the dispute is on Building 12 and you feel you have more information on Building 12, then my argument would be Building 16 does not have that
You didn't-
detail to provide.
You didn't appeal that, you appealed the timelines on the second order letter, not the first one. The first order letter was not appealed. The second order letter just dictated what we were requiring from you to submit to us and to do. So the first order letter was not appealed. The second order letter clarified that there is a water infiltration issue because of the high water table, and there is a dampness issue. You can call it chronic or not chronic, but there's a water table issue that we determined out on site. There was flooding in the apartment, there was mold in the apartment. You didn't appeal that order letter, so that one stands. You appeal the second one, talking about the 5-day submittal for the proposed scope of work and signed contract and 30-day deadline. So right now, let's just deal with building number 12, which is the chronic word. That's all that you appealed was the chronic dampness in building 12. Documentation that I've given the board and talked about tonight indicates that it is a chronic issue. It's been happening for 30 years fairly consistently. And that's only what we have documented and that we found in the files.
And I think that that's what we are disputing at this point in time. When you use the term that it's been happening for 30 years and it's been happening ongoing.
Yep.
It happened 25 years ago. We did building foundation work. It resolved at that point in time. Now you're getting another complaint, and as Mr. Nicholas has explained, by his own information and by his own personal inspection, part of the issue with this particular building on this particular day was the gutter issue that was resolved the same day. I know you talked about going there by noon on that day. So while there might have been an order back in 1991, and why it wasn't advised in the site plan is because it wasn't where the water would typically go. So I think that that's the concern, that the chronic labeling of it and having to be an ongoing, that word evokes that it's a consistent, ongoing issue. There have been isolated issues 25 years ago. There was now this isolated issue, which we do have a very reasonable, rational reason for why this is going on. But I think that the point that Brian's been trying to make is that they're willing and they're wanting to comply with what you need to be done. And that in the future also, if there are other issues, they will address them as quickly as they can do those things. I think that their history of going through and doing almost 30 buildings to date has showed that they have a major investment in the town and that they're going to continue to have that investment in the town. But the issue with the winter weather is a very real issue for the tenants who are going to be there. I primarily deal with those tenants when we go to housing court, and when they talk about the inconveniences, that's what we're looking to also negate. So that's the one point, and our issue is, and the board can decide, and I think that Mr. McCarthy has made himself clear on what he feels, and you have also, in terms of what that word means to you, but what that word from our standpoint evokes an ongoing, consistent problem. And I don't think that that's what has happened here.
But I think we went over what Brian said before. This is a phrase and a term that's taken from the state code. This isn't something that he interpreted and said, I think it's pretty chronic because it's here and there. It's pulled out of the state code. So I think if you object to that, you need to, we've interpreted the code and said this is the phrasing that applies here based on past history. You ought to be arguing some other alternative based on the history as you've seen it.
I don't think that there's any...
The state code says, there's a state code.
Correct.
Use
And
chronic dampness
yes, use that as a violation.
as a violation. And they've, based on inspection and history, used that. And
But I think
if
the
you're
end
looking to argue with the
result...
state code, that's...
Right. But I think that the end result that everybody's looking for, and what everybody in this room probably can agree on at this point in time, is that we've been confronted with an issue, whether it was from the gutter, whether it is from other issues on the site, and we're going to do the work that you're asking to be done. So we're parsing over this one word because it does have larger implications for us down the road, but from the board's point of view, I would hope that your concern with the tenants and with what these individuals are confronting is going to be resolved. Within the next, we're towards the end of December as it is, it's going to, we hope to start this work in the beginning of March once the weather has been alleviated, hopefully, because sometimes we get snowstorms in the middle of March. But we would actively work with your office to make sure that it gets done, and that when both sides agree that it's going to be the most productive for this to be done, it will be done. So I think that part of it is the semantics of it, but part of it is also we are here to make you aware that we take these complaints seriously. We're doing the work. We want to work with you, not against you, which seems there seems to be a little bit of a confrontation, and we don't want that to happen in the future. We want to be working with you to get these things done, and we've done a lot of work to date, and we will continue to do that work. So today, what we're asking is for that chronic labeling to be removed, to have the work start, and we could talk about, maybe meeting back and having a date that we regroup in terms of assessing the weather situation in maybe the end of February, and then start to get the work done in the beginning of March so that it can be completed in the most productive way. Because as it's been explained to me, if it's not done, and if it's not waited until the spring, 8 hours of work is only going to produce 4 hours of really productive work.
So I hear all that, but again, in the past, when people come before us for complaints or sort of this kind of thing, we've asked for alternatives, how they would look at something. So again, Brian and the team chose a definition that's in the state code. We don't have, we use the state code as the basis of these violations. So what, is there a violation that just says dampness, number one? And number two, we get that you say there's a problem there that you want to fix, but we heard that there have been mitigations to people there. So you said it may be 4 months before we get this fixed, but there is some water problem in that apartment. Has there been discussion with those people? And
I don't think that there's any remaining water problem, whatever we want to term it as, in Building 12, because we're talking about Building 12 right now. I don't think that the tenant has any sort of water issue, water problem.
That's 100% confirmed with him, that he, after other rainstorms, he has not had an issue. But so if we're talking about the building.
Building 12.
Building 12.
yeah.
I'll let you continue, Don.
So as of right now, there's no issue, there's been no report, there's no follow-up from, or no further complaints from Building 12. So I think that at this point, we are asking for this not to be the order, if that's what you're asking, in place, that the order be revoked, and knowing that we still will absolutely put it on the schedule and work with you to get it done.
Let me just stop there. I don't want to put you on the spot back there, but I don't know if you're parties to this issue. This is not a closed 16. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
In that, there are two main issues. One is the word chronic in the order letter, and the other is the timeline for the remediation. And by the way, we do acknowledge that you've done a lot of work. That's not the issue here, though. Perhaps we should have two separate motions on this. The first to leave in or take out the word chronic, and the second is the timeline for the remediation. Just a suggestion. Tom, comments?
Sorry, go ahead.
I said perhaps?
I'm sorry.
Do I have a question?
Yes.
The terminology
Yeah, I have that, yeah. So perhaps there should be two motions. One is, should we or should we not leave the word chronic in the order letter? And two is the timeline for the remediation.
Well, they came forward with two clear points of objection, so I think we could divide it.
Okay?
Suzanne, is that pretty reasonable?
To divide it, yes.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Can I make a
'Cause
motion?
He opened and asked for two different arguments, so.
Can I make a,
Do you want to dispose of it first, or do you want to hear the testimony on the other part?
I'm somewhat burned out with this word chronic. We've been at this for a long, long time. I make a motion that we leave the word chronic in the order letter.
Second.
Okay.
Any more discussion?
Any further discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? Okay. You want to make a motion to the timeline?
Make a motion to the timeline for the remediation of building 12.
Yep.
Now, considering the timeline, I'm somewhat sympathetic.
I'd like to hear
To
from
where
your
they're coming
engineer on
from.
this one, as a point of discussion.
Okay.
Evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Kenneth Laney at Cornerstone Land Consultants, representing AIMCO, Royal Crest Estates. And what would you like me to address?
I'm curious about the logistics in doing this type of construction in the winter, what it entails.
It's not
and
easy.
Nothing's ever easy in the
Nothing's
winter.
easy.
But
I mean, winter's tough. You know, ultimately, the application of the waterproofing is the most important part of this project when it comes down to construction. Excavation, as you stated, I mean, ultimately can happen in the winter. It's, again, not easy. You deal with frost. The longer we go into the winter, you have more frost, and even coming into March, the frost will be the thickest. So, you know, it doesn't make it any easier whether I start in the end of the end of March or tomorrow. Frost is already here. We actually are out at Royal Crest excavating, and there is already frost. It's probably about 6 inches thick right now, so it already makes it difficult to excavate. But again, you know, anything can be done. Where the difficult part comes in is in order to apply the waterproofing membrane that we utilize, it's a water-based membrane. So it took a lot of time to coordinate with conservation on accepting an actual environmentally friendly waterproofing system. Because as we all know, we are within the water table, and this particular system is a much more environmentally friendly system. So as a result, being water-based, it freezes at a much, you know, higher temperature than, let's say, your normal tar that you would put on the outside of a foundation. That type of stuff, again, is petroleum-based, where this is a water-based substance. So in order for me to apply that, I literally will have to tent off the entire excavated area around the building. And when I say tent off, I mean construct a wooden theoretical lean-to, and then cover that wooden lean-to with, you know, 10 mil plastic, and then I'll have to heat the inside of that tent and try to keep it above 40 degrees in order for me to apply the waterproofing membrane. That's
how long would it take for the waterproofing to dry?
so,
Which
okay,
put on
so
there?
as a result of the temperature, it's tough to say. You know, if we can try to keep the ambient temperature in that tented area above 40 degrees, it should dry in 72 hours. And I have to apply 4 coats. So just the application, as long as I can keep it above. So obviously, at any temperature above 65 degrees, it dries in 24 hours. As the temperature just drops, it just takes longer to dry. And, you know, there's that additional cost, obviously, running those heaters in that tented area. You know, we've utilized propane heaters in the past. So again, that concern for us, we need to keep that area vented. So there's a little bit of a concern with, obviously, as you know, those units being below the subterranean level, that we don't have any issue with any type of, you know, carbon monoxide, that type of stuff.
Now,
So
that's roughly 3 days drying per coat?
Well, it's 72 hours to get full
four
dry
coats.
at a temperature below 40 degrees.
And that's all 4 coats, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
All 4 coats?
Yeah.
Right, but the mean temperature in March is still 30s, 40s.
I mean, I would hope, I'm hoping. I have no idea what the temperature's going to be.
Unless it's unusually warm in March. So when would you realistically expect to be able to perform
I mean, I
this
think
with
that,
ambient temperatures?
yeah, when we discussed it, I think that, without needing to do any type of tenting, April 1st would be a realistic start date. Because when we apply the actual waterproofing, if it's 50 degrees at 10 o'clock and it doesn't get to 40 degrees or 38 degrees until 5 o'clock, there is that dry time there where the actual membrane will dry, and we heat the membrane as we go along. The problem is dropping that temperature below 30 degrees in the winter. It's not that we can't make it work. It's just the amount of heaters that we would have to have in there. It's pretty substantial. But
Now, the problem that there's been for years is mold. And I'm asking, not telling, from your perspective, and also perhaps from your perspective. Is it more pronounced during the summer or during the winter? Because the ground is frozen during the winter, but the outside of the wall is still relatively warm in each building. So maybe there's some frost that has melted. I don't know.
I think, though, that we're talking about water infiltration, not necessarily the conclusion of mold.
well, I can't speak to mold. I'm not a mold expert. I'm a civil engineer. We
But
don't
we're talking
deal with
about
mold.
water infiltration when the ground is frozen during the wintertime.
Right. I mean, I
So
can't speak
could-
to
could it
mold.
be that there's
I'm not a
less in the
mold-
winter? I mean,
I'm
I
not
would
a
think that
mold
perhaps
guy.
there is.
I mean, I can tell you that in the wintertime, when you have frost, I mean, the water table is typically lower than average than you would say in a springtime. I mean, I can speak to that amount. I mean, obviously, the reason that water table rises and falls is you get 3 months of snow and frozen ground. When that snow and frozen ground melts, it adds to the water below the surface and the water table rises. And then as the summer months come along, it evaporates the water in the ground and that water table decreases. I mean, it's just a normal cycle of how the water table reacts in the state of Massachusetts.
Your water table is the highest in the fall and in the spring.
Correct.
Fall and spring.
Yeah.
But the
Not
recent
say-
issue was the runoff.
The spring issue is the runoff. You have your
But I'm saying the
snow.
recent issue that we had the complaint on.
It was in the fall. Yep.
Was due to runoff.
Yes.
And that problem.
For
was-
building 12, correct.
and that problem has been addressed with flashing of gutters or something on that.
They redirected the gutters and did some grading work around the foundation. But obviously with it being really close to a wetland, we went out and did some soil testing, found out the slab's at the same elevation as the seasonal high water table. So it's just a matter of time before it gets higher and lower, higher, lower, and gets in. So it's going to be an ongoing thing over the course of time, which is pretty, standard when you build on top of a wetland.
Do you want to take
So-
another crack at what he just said?
Do I want to?
Yes.
I mean, I can't dispute anything that Brian had stated. I'm a civil engineer, I'm a soil evaluator in the state of Massachusetts. We went out and did test pits. I have photographs. I mean, the test pits are very evident of where the water table is. Pretty much anybody that has any clue about soils could tell you that. And we did survey the elevations, and the elevations, as Brian had stated, are almost identical. I mean, we're talking a 10th separation between the water table and the bottom of the foundation.
Yeah.
So is the water diversion mitigation or not?
It will help a little bit because it was directing some of the runoff, surface runoff away. But what happens is you have your foundation and you have your water table. When you get a big rainstorm, you have very dense, compact soils there. And so it infiltrates down around the foundation and then mounds while it slowly perks into the water table and levels off. So while you have that groundwater mounding around the foundation, it gets in.
Okay.
And then once the water table gets even higher, it mounds even longer. So it's just a matter of time. It's peeking through the cracks. And all the old tie rods, when they put the foundation forms in, those metal rods deteriorate and you have holes right through the foundation. Perfect channels for water to get through. So you have that and pulling in the subfloor, and then you have mold on your laminate floors, mold under your rugs, then it's definitely an issue. So my concern is in the spring, when you have the snow melt and the temperature starts to rise, but you haven't started the work yet, or the work's not completed, you're gonna have that same issue again. And all the basement apartments in that building will be subject to the same thing.
Well, if that is the case, then they would have to be vacated.
What's your cost percentage difference for doing it now versus in May? Ballpark.
An additional 30% on the cost of construction.
Okay.
Is the quality of work as good in the winter as it is in the other seasons?
No.
So it's an additional 30% with work that probably would not be as good as it would otherwise.
I've done the work in the winter, and I've done the work in the summer. So I'm just stating my own personal opinion.
No, that's okay.
My hands are really cold when you're trying to grind off those very small circles that are the tie rods. I mean, you know, it can be done, but it's cold. But it definitely can be done. You know, work-wise, you know, it's definitely, you know, any construction done in the wintertime. I mean, you're an engineer. I'm sure you've been
Well,
on
chemical,
that.
so.
Oh, all right. I mean, I'm sure you've been
But
on
we
the
have
wintertime.
engineers, too.
Yeah. I mean, I got to go out and do test fits next week, and I'm not looking forward to it. So, but, you know, it's...
Now, would you start, let's say that you were able to start around the timeline that you would
Okay.
want to.
Yes, sir.
Would that be predicated on a specific date, or would it be predicated on the weather?
I mean, I think it would, I mean, let's put it this way. If we had an unusually short winter.
Like this
and
past year.
And it barely snowed. It snowed 3 times last year. I mean, realistically.
right,
And the
right.
temperature in March had, you know, again, was seasonably normal at the 40s. I mean, we could obviously start that. I mean, we can start whenever it appears like, you know, the weather would be higher than 40 degrees on a regular basis. Remember, any type of application of that waterproofing below 40 degrees will require me to do heating.
So you're requesting to postpone till March or April, or to when the weather gets better, to when you can do the job that has to be done, knowing full well that if the problem continues in the interim, the apartment or apartments will have to be vacated if they cannot be properly remediated from within.
I mean, I can't speak to the vacated part. I'm not the owner. I mean, they'd have to talk about.
But they would
that.
have to be. If you can't
Again,
remediate from within, they'd
I'm
have to
just
be
an engineer.
vacated.
So that's a question for the manager.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just the engineer. I can do the work.
And I don't think that that's what we're here today to talk about vacating units on the first floor as part of this.
But you're asking
Human
for,
habitation code.
yeah, you're asking for a postponing of the timeline of work, so we have to consider the what-ifs. If we do allow it and problems occur within that timeline that was put in the initial order letter, what happens if the mold problem occurs again?
Well, I don't think that we've had the timeline from October, it is, right? From when this first, in Building 12 we're talking about. And we've had no issues with any of the residents and no complaints about anything. So I think that we're fairly confident that would not occur by the time that the springtime came around when we were doing this.
So then you wouldn't object to us saying, if there is a problem, it needs to be remediated to those residents because you're confident there will not be a problem.
Fair. It's fair enough, because I'm confident that this particular issue was caused by the gutter, because I saw it with my own eyes. Therefore, you know, and that we have not had other complaints in the building, and certainly residents are a priority at our property. If there was an issue that made their apartment not habitable, yes, we would take care of them. We would not allow them to stay in an apartment that had an issue. I feel like the potential issues that could come out of doing this project in the wintertime outweigh, you know, the benefits of waiting until the springtime to do them where we would be less disruptive to the residents living in the building.
So if we were to put into a motion, say, in terms of timeline, because you can't pick a date any better than he can or we can of April 1st or whatever, what would you offer as a timeline?
I've been living in New England, maybe not as long as Mr. McCarthy, but at least the past 36 years. And I would safely say that the middle of March is
No, I'm not asking for a set date, I'm asking for
a timeline to
a
actually
time,
complete it.
are you, he said as soon as possible.
Oh, if,
I mean, are you available to do this work, sort of, I mean, I don't know what your timeline is of doing work. If you see that early March suddenly becomes warm, can he do it then before we get into
That's-
April rains? Or do you have to work on a calendar basis that says, I can start my work on April 15th or whatever? Our interest really is in getting this done as quickly as possible, as I'm sure yours is, so
we're,
a specific date isn't really the issue here. It's, once it's doable,
we're comfortable to commit to doing the work as soon as, yes, the weather turns, and if that happens to be March 1st, like Kenny said, and the weather has been a mild winter, and we can do it on starting the excavation and start doing the foundation in the middle of March, then we'll do that. And then if unfortunately, if it happens to be March 20th, then that's when we would start. And I feel that the fact that we would be able to do the work in a shorter time frame, where if we started on January 1st, it could take 10 to 12 weeks, and we'd be going until March anyway, to get the same amount of work done that we do if we start on March 15th and get it done by April 15th could be much better for the residents in the building who are citizens here in North Andover.
So what's
So
your
I think-
what's your anticipated timeline to complete one building?
46 weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
he said
do it.
4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks, yeah, 45 to 60 days, so 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
So you have to understand,
45 days, right?
yep, so you have to understand too,
30
Yeah.
to 45, or 45?
Yeah, 45 to 60 days, or 30 to 45.
right, so,
30 to 45?
all right, so here's my response. We've done 20 buildings out there, personally, our company, and every single building has an issue when you excavate out the foundation. Not a major issue on a Board of Health world, but an issue with a foundation potentially missing a portion of footing, or a large crack that would need to be addressed, or something that could potentially delay the completion. So I don't want to sit here and say, hey, I'm a great contractor, I can do it in 30 days, because I know we're going to probably run into something that's going to take a little bit longer to address. Every single one of these buildings that we've opened up in the past has had, what they call a lip of the foundation that was utilized to gain access to pour the actual slab in the past. And once we excavate that out, we need to address that issue. So again, I'm not guaranteeing that this particular building or any other particular building will have this issue, but we've run into this particular issue on, I would say, 90% of the structures that we've done at Royal Crest. So again,
Yeah.
could we do it if there were no issues at all? I could do it in 45 days. If there were, but I'm a pessimist now. This world has made me long a pessimist. I started as an optimist. So I'm saying 60 days is my timeline to be realistic.
Brian, I have a question for you.
Sure.
If we move to grant them relief from the winter weather, what would you suggest we do about the issue about the habitability of these units if they become uninhabitable?
I would personally have them notify the residents on those bottom floors via certified mail, so we get the green cards and we know that they were signed for and done. And let them know that they're going to be doing foundation work in the spring. If they have any mold issues or chronic dampness issues, to notify management, and then management would find another suitable apartment for them at a different level at the same rate.
Okay,
Because the bottom apartment's usually cheaper,
right, I understand.
so when they move up, they get upcharged.
So
And
if
some
they only
people-
have the availability upstairs, then
Correct.
they need to be able to accommodate them at the
And
same
and we
level.
don't want them to be forced out of an apartment into an apartment they can't afford. That's a real
Let's-
concern for us.
Let's give them a chance to comment on this.
Okay, yeah.
I think that's fair enough that we send a notice to them regarding the fact, long in advance of the project, we do send notices about the project regardless, so we just add that in the interim, if any residents experience any water infiltration issues into the building, that we would, you know, need to know about it immediately, so the situation can be addressed, and we can ensure that their apartment's habitability comes first.
This is four apartments, correct? In this build, four basement, 4 lower level.
The one thing, though, I would say is it's not necessarily guaranteed that they're going to be vacant apartments in the upper floors. That's what you're also guaranteeing, right? That you're going to be moving them to the suburb. I know that you,
I don't think we
They're
have to
moving
say
to
upper
a-
levels.
yeah, they're moving to a different
another
apartment
Fair enough.
at the same rate.
if there is such a vacant apartment at that time.
Well, that
Well, we-
means, other means.
Correct.
That is
Right.
one.
I mean, and we
Some
might
other
not
type of
have.
housing for them.
I'd love to be
Yeah.
100% occupied all the time. It's realistically never really happened at any
I mean,
project.
we're talking building 12 and building 16, that's only 8 apartments.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, to even say that there'd be another one in building 12 would be hard pressed. But we have 588 apartments
Okay.
that's throughout the community, so,
Okay.
you know, if there was an issue that
Yeah.
we could
Okay,
temporarily transfer somebody until the spring, or if they'd like.
That's all we're
permanent.
asking.
okay, so you could do building 12 and building 16 timelines, because building 16, they only appeal the
Let's do
timeline.
building 12 right now.
Okay.
And the one word that I would caution, you said if there's water infiltration or mold. Mold is a bigger step for us.
Okay.
So if you could use, and the letter that is directed to them is if there's any water infiltration or moisture.
Okay. I'm okay with that. I mean, mold is an indication of that, so if there's...
Well, we want to get it at the moisture level, not at the point where they're even seeing anything more than that.
Or the letter says water infiltration, not mold, so.
Correct. Okay.
All right, so,
Okay.
Can I just interject there? And I don't mean to interject,
Please.
just in terms of that language. One of the things that you've cited the property owner on is the existence of chronic dampness. And that includes, if you read the definition within the code, that includes mold and water infiltration. So I think it would be important to be consistent throughout the proceeding with this particular property owner and state in your notice letter that use that same word, chronic dampness.
Okay.
Because that includes within that term, all of those conditions are included. But if you limit it to one instance of chronic dampness, then you're limiting your enforcement order.
So just so I'm clear, you want to use the larger term chronic dampness rather than the more specific?
Yes. I mean, I would suggest that since
I'm
that's
okay
how
with
you've
that. Yeah,
found
that's
the
correct.
violation that you have found.
Correct.
So
Thank
just
you,
to be
Suzanne.
consistent.
Yeah, the
throughout.
point I made to Brian is mold is not in his initial order letter, so on that I agree with you, that we should stick with the violation as was stated, which indicates water infiltration and chronic dampness. I think we stick to that in terms of from now till the spring when he can get his work done.
So, and I don't mean to belabor the point, but under the state sanitary code, chronic dampness is defined as the regular and/or periodic appearance of moisture, water, mold, or fungi. So when they're cited for chronic dampness, all of those terms, mold and all that, is included within that.
Correct.
And that's why.
And that's what the order in building 16 was for, because of the mold conditions. Obviously, it was in the subfloor coming up through the laminate floor, and you could see the lines of mold around each piece of laminate and on the underside and the top of the carpets. So I'm completely happy with that wording. If you guys are all set, then maybe we can move forward.
so I'd like to move on the matter of Building 12, that the order be modified so that the 4 basement apartment owners be notified by certified mail that the foundation work will be delayed to the spring, and to notify the management if there is any signs of chronic dampness as defined in the state statute, and that a suitable of replacement apartment at the same rate be applied or be made available for the temporary period of dislocation if there's any needed.
Okay.
And that also includes the work being delayed until the spring?
I believe that was...
Yeah, that was in.
Yeah, that was the first.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was going to make a similar motion with perhaps one exception. You say that...
Joe, you can't, a motion's on the floor, so you have to speak to the motion
Or seconded.
or second it.
I am speaking to the motion right now. Okay?
Okay.
That one change I
Well,
would
it
have...
hasn't been seconded yet. So if you want to second it, you can do that and then
Okay,
go for it.
second.
Okay. I'm sorry, we have two attorneys in the room, I have to be careful.
And a couple of engineers.
Yeah.
Talking about in the spring, he was saying that perhaps it could be done in March. As such, maybe we should have an end date for starting it on, say, April the 1st. I mean, the spring, when's the last day of spring? That's June, isn't it? June 21st or
June
something like
21st,
that? Yeah,
yeah.
that's, I don't know, what do you want? We don't want to wait till June 21st.
I mean, it could be not that late, necessarily the end of spring, but if you want to say the issue will be determined by health department staff and engineering representatives from AMCO, determine a
Reasonable.
appropriate start date.
Reasonable?
Okay.
All right, I will second that amendment.
You got that, Lisa? Okay.
Okay. We got all that? Any further discussion on that motion? All right, all those in favor of the motion as amended? Aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Okay, great.
And,
Thank you.
Building 16,
Move
the
to building 16.
appeal. You'll be here in 10 minutes. Yeah, building 16, the appeal for the date of work to be completed.
I would say that I think that
Say the same.
the same
could be
arguments
used.
and the same rationale, except for the fact that with building 16, in terms of the, but as you've pointed out, and as I looked through, it wasn't about the chronic issue. We did not appeal that
Correct.
aspect of it. So it really is about just the
date.
delay start date.
Yeah.
So really, all of the same issues and rationale apply to
So I
building
think
16.
the exact same motion for, you guys can propose.
No, you have
And we
people
have,
here
people here who'd like
that
to
are
speak to
part
it.
of this, and this is not a
Okay.
closed hearing, so if you want to, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if you want to talk, you have every right to do that. But you need to come up to the podium, please.
Good, thank you.
If you don't want to, don't feel like you have to. I want to give you the opportunity.
All right. Lisa, I'd like to move the same motion that we made on 12 to building 16 with regard to the delay of construction.
I second.
Any further discussion?
No.
All right, all those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, that's fine. I think those are the only two formal things we had on the agenda. We did have the meeting minutes. Larry is not here to sign them. In that event, do you
We just postponed it to the next
postpone to
meeting.
the next meeting, or do you delegate that to another board member?
It's noted as signed by the clerk, so perhaps it would be best to wait off till the next meeting.
Okay.
So we'll put off the meeting, the vote on the meeting minutes.
Todd asked.
Although we could approve them now and have Larry sign them later, because we have a quorum here. Why don't we do that? We're going to approve the minutes now, and Larry can sign them at another time. He doesn't have to vote to sign as
Correct,
the clerk,
correct.
so. Thank you.
I hope we never see each other.
The minutes from October 27, 2016 minutes have been circulated and reviewed. If there are no further edits, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I make a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, Joe, you asked for a few minutes under communications. I'm going to caution you, you're the only one standing between us and dinner right now, so.
Then I will do something different. I'll make it relatively quick. I'd like to talk for just a few minutes on the recreational use of marijuana. It's now legal in Massachusetts for all adults over 21 years old. And these adults can possess up to 1 ounce outside their home. and 10 ounces inside the home, and can grow up to 12 plants. Marijuana cannot be sold for at least another year. So the government is working on the specifics as far as the regulation. And looking at it from the perspective of an engineer, I'm trying to look at it from a further quantitative perspective. What does this mean? What is an ounce of marijuana? If you have a cigarette, a tobacco cigarette, it's 0.9 grams of tobacco. A joint of marijuana would be probably less than that. Now, there are 28.35 grams in an ounce. So an ounce of marijuana would be equivalent to at least 31.5 cigarettes. And a person could have up to 10 ounces in his or her home, which is 315 cigarettes. That's enough to get high for a year. The big problem I have with this law is you can grow up to 12 plants in your home. And these plants can grow up to 30 feet high and have at least 17 pounds of marijuana in each one. If you break that down to marijuana joints, that's 8,600 joints. And if you can have, did I say 10? I think it's 12 marijuana plants in one's home. That's it's over 100,000 joints. 100,000 joints. I asked, does the state really know what it's doing? 100,000 joints. That's enough to get every adult in Essex County high. Now, whether one approves or disapproves of the law, the use, there are consequences for misuse. Driving. We have a blood alcohol test. There is no such test for marijuana. Ease of accessibility, which for some people could be an entree drug to harder drugs. Matter of fact, I saw yesterday the movie with Casey Affleck, Manchester by the Sea, and he played the part of Lee Chandler. He was a handyman. Out with his buddies, drinking, smoking a few joints, sniffed a little cocaine, and then his life absolutely unraveled, as bad as it can be. And this is what can and does happen. In Ipswich, and I was reading the paper this morning, and then I said to myself, well, maybe I'll talk a little bit about it at a meeting tonight. There is a potential warrant article to ban the recreational marijuana shops in town. North Andover may want to consider such a warrant article too. As I said, I'll make it brief, but in conclusion, our town and our state has a long way to go. And the info coming from states that is legal right now, such as Colorado, we're in for a rough ride. We really are. But the main concern, and I ask myself, do these legislators, do they know the 12 plants? 12 plants. Each plant can get thousands of people high. And yet it's legal in Massachusetts. I question again whether our government knows what it's doing. This is going to be a real problem, and I know it's going to be brought up by our town selectmen, by the members of the Board of Health. I do hope that we have a warrant article for the forthcoming town meeting, and what is it, May this year? May? Yeah, I don't know if there is. Do you know if there is such an article? I think we should look into it, just to ban the sale of marijuana in North Andover. We could do that.
Does it take to sponsor a warrant article? 10 or 20?
There's a small set number that you have
Yeah,
to have
it's in the town bylaws, you can look it up online, but it's.
You're asking me.
I thought you
I missed that, Frank. What was you saying?
Oh, it's in the town bylaws, how many people it takes to sponsor a warrant article. I think you can just grab a few of your neighbors and get it on. We've had.
But they all smoke, so they wouldn't sign it.
Well, it's, I hear your points, but not to challenge you, but I think marijuana is not as easy to grow as you just said it was, and most of the plant isn't usable. It's only the flower that's usable. And so.
I looked at saleable from the big products, 17 pounds. I reviewed it,
that's
spent hours today reviewing it. You know, just looking at it, we have numbers, what does ounces mean, what does 10 ounces mean, what does 12 plants mean? It can be up to that, up to 100,000
Right.
joints from one plant.
Right.
Obviously, arguably, it's going to be considerably less than that. But what's considerably less? Not 100,000, 10,000?
Well, it wasn't written by
Oh.
the government, it was written by interested people in the marijuana lobby who wrote the.
We're in for a
ballot
rough
question.
ride, I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be really rough going forward.
Well, Joe, I think you did raise some very valid points. I mean, this question of driving, these are questions in the scientific and medical community that have not been settled in places where it's been around for a while. And however you look at it, it probably is a little bit of sort of, maybe a little bit of the cart before the horse here, but as they say, it is what it is. We can't change the law. I'm not even sure sort of where the ceiling and the floor is in this, how a town can completely negate what becomes state law. But you're right, there are a lot of questions raised by this, but it was not put in place by the legislature. It was voted in by the residents of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It was the will of the voters, not of the State House, so.
And it's going to take another year to have a law that talks about the specifics of what's in place right now. Doesn't make any sense to me, but it is what it is. You know, for example, you can't sell right now. You can't sell marijuana. Well, how are you going to get it?
I'll be growing it in my basement.
Your basement 30 feet tall.
I think we hear the points, but those debates and sort of how that law gets formed won't come from this body. I think that's something
I
that
understand.
the selectmen are going to have to grapple with that and then take that to our local legislators, and hopefully they'll take this to the State House. You're right, it's not a simple, easy thing to crack.
The
Because
legislators didn't touch this because it's a radioactive topic. So I think maybe you'll get something in the regulatory side, but I just don't see the legislators opening this up again. The people have spoken, and nobody's going to take a position.
Well, there are things that we can and
Contrary to that.
cannot do. One thing we can do is say, no marijuana shops for recreational purposes. I'm not talking about for medical purposes.
We
No
already have it
marijuana
zoned.
shop for recreational purposes in
Correct.
North Andover. We could do that.
It's already zoned for the medical.
Excuse me?
It's already zoned for the medical dispensary.
Yeah, I know, but I'm
Yeah.
talking about for recreational.
I don't know if there's a way to isolate that to
Well,
a
that's what
certain type of
Ipswich
zoning,
is
or-
wrestling with right now.
And that's a legal question.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it through your warrant article.
That's all I have to say about that.
All right, then.
It'll make for a very interesting spring town meeting. Might
Yeah.
actually get more than 40 people showing up.
I hope they won't all be high.
Put something on there about having chickens or marijuana. You get a lot of people to show up.
do we have any other communications from the staff that we might have missed? We have, this has already been looked at, right? We've already distributed the schedule, so we approve this, but did not really make a motion to vote on it last time. So this is just information only.
Okay.
Move to adjourn is always in order.
It's made.
Up for discussion?
No, you can't.
Second.
I think you cannot discuss a motion to adjourn. You either vote or you don't vote.
That's right, it's not debatable.
So,
I second.
all right.
Do you want to thank our wonderful staff member for her 3 years of glorious service before you adjourn?
I mean, 4.
It's 4.
Why do you segue into that? I think the board was not aware of that.
We will suspend the rules and allow this discussion.
Yeah.
I want to thank Lisa for her 4 years of wonderful service to the town of North Andover. And she is leaving in a week and a half and going to the town of Tewksbury. So this is her last public hearing.
Thank you very much.
And it was a good one, too.
Thank you.
Well, because I don't have much of a life and I'm at town hall most every day.
Standing ovation.
As I was saying, I'm in town hall most every day because I don't have much of a personal life, and I am aware of this. And she is you're going to be so sorely missed. The quality of your work, the reports, the minutes, the agenda, absolutely superb. And wish you the very best.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and everything. A good communicator drives everything, right?
Yes. So big shoes to fill.
back to our vote.
All right. We move to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.